So White Flower is the story of, it's actually a true story. It happened in Knoxville, Tennessee about 5 years ago. And what happened was that there was a Klan rally, disturbing thing obviously, in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the counter-protesters, instead of deciding to try to shout down the shouters, what they did was they formed a group called the COUP, C-O-U-P, Klutz Clowns, and the CCC took on the KKK. And they prepared a lot of street theater. They did a lot of really humorous stuff with gags, and they subverted the energy of the event. You know, the Klan doesn't mind if you shout at them and hate them. That's kind of what they're looking for. They want to generate that kind of emotion in a community. So the clowns decided not to give them that. They wanted to change the energy of the event entirely, and they did that. And they won. What happened was that the Klan actually left an hour and a half early. They had the public square reserved for several hours, and they had no idea how to respond to this funny stuff that was going on with the clowns. And so they actually gave up and went home. And I think it's a beautiful story of nonviolent resistance, and it's also a really powerful paradigm shift, because, you know, we believe in our country, I think the dominant mythology is that when you have a problem, when you have a conflict, the way you solve that, the way you make things better, is for the good guys to beat up the bad guys, and then everything's better. And if you don't believe me that that's our dominant narrative, I'd suggest you go to the local multiplex and check the titles. You know, there are 12 movies playing there, and I bet you anything that 10 of them have that plot, right? The good guys beat up the bad guys, and everything's better.
Right.
Walter Rink, of course, did lots of academic work on what he called the myth of redemptive violence. The fact is, when you look at history, there are tons of stories of nonviolent resistance that is effective. But we have dual standards. You know, we say that when we see a nonviolent action, and we see that somebody gets hurt or even killed, and we see that was a terrible idea. That they shouldn't have done that. You know, that was ridiculous. But we don't use those same standards when someone goes in with war or with violence, and people get hurt or killed. We say, hey, that's the cost of war.
Right.
Right. We don't hold them to the same standards.
Indeed.
And so I think when you do start holding them to the same standards and take an honest look at different strategies and how they work, you find that nonviolence proves to be quite effective on the whole, historically. And so I think it's really important that we tell these stories. So I wasn't at this event. I know some people who were, but I read about it. A few weeks later, a friend of mine sent me an email about this event, and I just loved the story because it's funny, for one thing, and it's very accessible, but it also tells this really important story. So I wrote a poem about it. I put the whole thing into a poem, and I started performing the poem at my concerts, and then after I'd been doing that for a while, I found that people were really responding powerfully to it. So I thought, I need to put this in front of a larger audience than just my musical audience. And so we made the book, and it's really going well. The book is really getting out there.
That's fantastic. And so how did you become a singer and peace activist? And is one form the other? What came first?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. I'm not sure I could even tell you which came first. They're both a part of me. But I know that when I look at my life history, there are a few little points that I can point to. Like when I was 14 or 15, I guess I got my first guitar, and that kind of changed my world. You know, I started writing songs very quickly. I only knew a few chords before I started writing songs. I had been a violin player when I was little, and I mean, you know, a terrible violin player as a small child, but that was my first instrument. And going from violin to guitar, of course, is a joy because guitars have frets, so you feel like you're cheating. It's just so easy when the note is kind of determined for you. At any rate, I kind of played music in my room with the door shut for about 5 years until I was in college, and some friends came over to a party that my roommate had thrown, and I didn't know anybody at the party, and there were hundreds of people crammed into our little tiny apartment. And then the one girl that I had invited, and her two friends that she had brought with her for self-defense, because she probably had an inkling that I had a crush on her, came to the party, and they couldn't find me anywhere, so they asked my roommate. He said, oh, he's in his room playing guitar probably, or he's in his room, just go on in there, and he won't be able to hear if you knock, you won't be able to hear what he says. So just walk on in." And I walk in, and I'm sitting on my bed playing my guitar.
Oh.
And they said, "I didn't know you played guitar." And I said, "Yeah, I really." and they said, "Play us a song." And so I did. You know, I was staring at my belly button the whole time, but I played them a song that I had written when I was 15. It was a tender kind of goodbye song. And I looked up at the end of it, and they were all crying.
Oh.
And I thought it was even worse than I feared. You know, actually, the song was so bad that I made them cry. But then I figured out that they were actually moved by it. And so that opened my world up. I thought, wow, these little songs that I write for me could actually mean something to somebody else. So I had to pursue that a little bit. I started to perform gigs, and gradually that grew into the career that I've had for the last 23 years. My whole life I've been passionate about peace issues. Grew up under the Reagan administration and the Cold War, the waning days of the Cold War, and when our stated policy for the United States government was mutually assured destruction. You know, MAD, we called it the MAD policy.
Wow.
And that wasn't just language that the activists who were against that policy used. It was the language that the government used. It was
Wow, I didn't know that.
But mutually assured destruction was the détente. That was the deterrent to, or led to détente. They would argue that was the deterrent that kept us safe. That was their argument. I think it kept us very unsafe, and I'm happy we've made it this far. But I saw how crazy that was as a teenager. My mom was involved in the anti-nuke movement, and I saw a little bit of that, and I wanted to make a difference, as everybody wants to make a difference. I think, you know, people want their lives to matter. You know, I think especially this generation that's coming up, I think they care a little bit less about stuff and a little bit more about their lives matter. In fact, I heard John Zogby, the pollster, interviewed just a few days ago on NPR, and he was saying this. He said the numbers bear this out. But they care less about stuff. They care more about community, and they care about having an impact in the world. They want their lives to matter. And so when you see ways that your life can matter, obviously, you know, that feels like a calling. You're drawn to that. And so when I was in college, I also got really fired up about mediation work, which is another way to approach conflict. That is, you know, it's alternative conflict resolution, we say. And that's not to beat up on the legal system too much, because the legal system is technically already alternative conflict resolution. Violence is sort of our most natural response. Fight or flight is very deep in us, I think. You know, it's not, there's nothing unnatural about responding to conflict with violence, but we're evolving past that. You know, what's natural isn't always what's best. My son wears diapers at night. I don't. He's doing what's natural, right? But we can evolve past that to something that's more enlightened, and I think we're doing that. We are actually doing that. As discouraged as we can get as peacemakers, the numbers bear out. Steven Pinker's book, The Angels of Our Better Natures, and two other books that came out right around the same time, show statistically that violence is steadily declining over the history of humanity. It seems so counterintuitive, but it's true. Fewer people are dying now from violence, and that counts all violence, not only interstate war, but intrastate war and clan violence, and clan violence, interclan tribal kind of warfare, and drug violence, etc., etc. When you add it all up, it's strangely declining. We're actually maturing. Now, I'm not convinced that we're maturing so fast that I think we're getting smarter faster than we're getting wiser.
I see.
And we might well destroy ourselves before we have time to mature. I'm not offering a Pollyanna view, but I do think we're maturing. It's just that maturation is a slow and painful process.
Right.
So I hope we give ourselves the time to mature.
Wow. Right. And in your own process of maturation, in your own work, can you say what were the some of the moments or the people or the resources or books or whatever it was along your journey that provided you some kind of sense of this maturation for yourself that could be seen in your songs and your writing and your speaking.
Yeah, I encounter inspiration and instruction all over the place, more than I can possibly take in. You know, there's so many people. I want to spend a month with you just listening and not talking at all. You know, I meet extraordinary people everywhere I go, and most of them you've never heard of. And those are the people that inspire me the most, are the people that are doing the grassroots work. My friend Allison in North Carolina, who's working on issues around extraordinary rendition, because there's an airport in her town where the CIA flies these extraordinary rendition flights out of North Carolina. And they go to other countries and they pick up these people and they take them to prisons in other countries, and then they fly back to North Carolina.
Right.
And she sees this as a problem, and she sees the state government funding it, giving them tax breaks, and helping them with infrastructure improvements and such. And she's saying, wait a minute, we didn't vote for this as citizens of North Carolina. So she's working on exposing that in her little small southern town. It's costly for her.
Right.
And she's my hero, you know. And the fact is, there are people like her all over the place doing extraordinary work. And that is how you make the big changes. You know, we get so overwhelmed and we get immobilized by the enormity of the problems. And the problems are enormous. I'm not about to tell anybody that they aren't. But how we do that is we bite off chewable bites. How we make the big changes? I'm not saying that all small changes add up to big ones.
Right.
But I am saying that all big changes are made up of millions of small ones. So the way you make the big changes is bite off something chewable and get in the game. Don't be immobilized by the enormity of the problem. Movements change things. Heroes don't. The fact that you don't see yourself,
I like that.
The fact that you don't see yourself as a hero doesn't mean you're not needed in this. It means you're desperately needed in this. Because the function of heroes have a function, but their function is to inspire the rest of us to get to work. Things actually change when the rest of us do small bits. That's how things really shift.
And then tell me, because that's one thing that bothers me in somewhat in US is that this sense of this individuals, this emphasis on individuals who will start something, and then another individual who starts something. How can we build a sense of organizations, as you said, of communities, in what ways do you see these organizations being created, or in other words, where you see resistance happening, and could you mention some places where you have seen it that has taken more the work of a community than the work of just individuals? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, you know, the obvious example that's all over the news is the Occupy movement.
Right.
The Occupy movement is in a kind of a trough period, but I think you'll see the wave rising again this summer. They're not gone away. They're working hard behind the scenes. That's people who just said, wait, this thing that's happening, this isn't right. And we need to speak out against that. And they found each other, and they respect each other, and they put in structures to not feed that hero mythology. And now I'm not saying there aren't issues with the Occupy movement. I'm not holding them up as perfect. What I'm arguing is that we don't have to be perfect to make a change. And we think we do, because we have this hero mythology that you're talking about, this emphasis on individuals. I say, goodness, I'm no Dr. King, you know. But the fact is, Dr. King couldn't have done anything without all the people around him. Dr. King, his function was to inspire everybody. And our hero mythology is so profoundly instilled that we don't even question it. We don't even hold it up and look at that idea. It's just an assumption on which we base other conclusions. I'll give you an example. There's a guy named Mark Juddery who writes these articles about heroes. And he writes articles taking people down. He says, he writes articles called "The 8 Most Overrated People in History," things like that. So he wrote one, and among his 8 most overrated people was Gandhi. His argument was Gandhi didn't do much; it was all the people around him. As though to be a real hero, Gandhi would have expelled Britain by himself. But no, it's all of us that do the work together.
That's wonderful.